The Mangaluru Litfest honor Padma Shri Dr. Meenakshi Jain. The Bharat Foundation and the Mangalore Literature Festival are pleased to honor Padma Shri Dr. Meenakshi Jain at the 8th edition of the Mangaluru Literature Fest, held on 10th and 11th January 2026 at the Temepai International Convention Center, Mangaluru. This award is presented in recognition of your significant contribution to the study of understanding of Indian history and civilization. Madam, your academic work, grounded in extensive research and careful engagement with historical resources, has added depth and clarity to the public discourse on India's cultural and historical traditions. Through your writings and scholarly engagement, Madam, you have addressed complex historical themes with rigor and balance, encouraging informed discussion and thoughtful reflection. Your work has contributed meaningfully to contemporary conversations on history, identity, and interpretation of India's past, both within academic circles and in public domain. This honor recognizes individuals whose work strengthens intellectual inquiry and contributes to a deeper appreciation of India's civilizational heritage. Your scholarship reflects these values and continues to inform the enriched historical understanding. On behalf of the Bharat Foundation, the organizers, patrons, participants of the Mangalore Literature Festival, we convey our respect and appreciation for your contribution to literature, education, and historical research. It is a privilege to honor you, Madam, at this 8th edition of Mangaluru Literature Festival. Trustees, Bharat Foundation, Mangaluru, 10th January 2026.
And now to felicitate ma'am, I would like to call forward the esteemed dignitaries on the days, Mr. Sunil Kulkarni, Trustee Bharat Foundation, Sri Rajguri, Trustee Bharat Foundation, Sri Pradeep, Trustee Bharat Foundation, Dr. Ravi S., Honorary Secretary, the Mythic Society, Dr. Shatavadane R. Ganesh, to kindly come forward and felicitate our chief guest, Dr. Meenakshi Jain. A huge round of applause. We are truly honored to be here at her guidance. Thank you so much for everyone for doing the honors and felicitating our esteemed chief guest. Reconnecting with our civilizational heritage is a session that explores the roots of our identity, history, and cultural wisdom. This insightful discussion will be moderated by Ms. Prithvi K. Working as Chief of Staff at AgriLeaf Exports Private Limited, worked earlier as a Chief Finances Officer at the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT, ICAR, New Delhi, and as Assistant Professor in the Department of Management at JSS Academy of Technical Education, Noida, and Rajiv Gandhi University of Knowledge Technologies, Andhra Pradesh. A warm welcome to you, ma'am. You may kindly take over now.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the session with our, yes, with this mic.
At 12 p.m., another session will be starting at Audi 2. Netravati to Nile, Local Rivers, Global Stakes. Speaker Dr. Raghu Murthugunde, CA. Moderator Prashant Vaidyaraj.
Namaskaram. Namaskara. No. Is this better? You also need this. Is this better? This is all right.
Still for the better, for the lower better.
It's okay now.
Once again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you all to the session, Reconnecting with our Ancient Civilization. When we think of our ancient civilization, we usually come across the Egyptian, Iranian, or Mesopotamian civilization, where we see them mostly behind the glass in the museums as the remnants of concluded past. But India has made a remarkable anomaly. Here, we don't see it as closed or completed or concluded. We still breathe it, we still pray it, and it still survives between us. In Indian homes today, we still worship Mother Goddess, we still worship Shiva, which is close resemblance of the carved sacred symbols thousands of years ago, and the stones that are dating nearly 10,000 years ago, which are not just archaeological curiosities, but the objects of daily reverence. This continuity has raised a profound question. How did a civilization which is so ancient, which is frequently invaded, which is upheavaled, and has undergone continual reinterpretations, has still lived so deeply? Our conversation this morning is an exploration to that living link, texts and temples, memories and meaning, inscriptions and homes. We have with us in this journey, to guide us in this journey, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Meenakshi Jain, who is a distinguished historian, Padma Shri awardee of Mangaluru Lit Festival 2026, a scholar of India's civilizational traditions, and currently a member of the Rajya Sabha. Her work brings together archaeology, ancient text, social history to challenge the long held assumptions about India's past. Her few works are named as follows: Ram and Ayodhya, Sati, The Battle of Rama, Vasudeva Krishna and Mathura, The Hindus of Hindustan, Vishwanath Rises and Rises, The Story of Eternal Kashi. On behalf of 8th edition of Mangaluru Lit Festival, I warmly welcome you, ma'am, for this session. Dr. Jain, as I've already mentioned about the civilization, which is, it might be Egyptian civilization or ancient civilizations, other civilizations like Iranian civilizations, which are behind the glass museums. But Indus Valley civilization or the Indian civilization is a rare exceptional to that. What do you opine about this exceptional Indus Valley civilization?
I'd like to begin by saying how humble I feel sitting over here today. I remember this land as the land of great poets, great writers, and female warriors like Abaca Chota, who fought the Portuguese and defeated them so many times. This is the land of very famous Jain Basadis. I'm doing a work on that, and I am so overwhelmed by the kind of reception that Jainism as a faith got in this country, in this city for such a long time. I also feel humble that many people who are listed as speakers today are more worthy of this recognition than me, and I bow to their superior wisdom, and I thank Mother Goddess for blessing me. Namaskar. Now, having said this, this is a very important question, that the old civilizations of the world, none of them has survived except the Indian civilization. And this is all the more surprising because no other civilization in the world was attacked again and again for 1,000 years. You see, all the other civilizations, like you mentioned, Egyptian, Syrian, Persian, they all collapsed within a few decades of the attack on them. Whereas in India, we have sustained records to describe the assaults. And, you know, we have to clarify that the attacks on Indian civilization did not begin in the 7th, 8th century. They began a couple of centuries earlier. Actually, the first foreign rulers in India were the Indo-Greeks, the Indo-Bactrians, the Kushans, the Huns. It goes on. But why is it that we remained and we did not break our link with the past? One reason is that the fundamental features of this civilization had percolated to the lowest strata of society, to the common man. Every common man believed in Mother. Mother is the divine entity. And you will be surprised to know that, you know, so much of our past has been lost. We don't know how much has been lost. But whatever has survived by chance tells us what an ancient civilization we were and how we never surrendered the basic features of that civilization. There is a place in Madhya Pradesh. Archaeologists have dated that site to 9,000 BCE. 9,000 BCE means we are 25, 26, so it is more than 11,000 years old. And what is surprising is that site has remained untouched all these millennia. So the way it was constructed 11,000 years ago, that site is still intact in that very position, which is itself remarkable. Now, what is so remarkable about this site? It is a platform made of rough stone. And in the middle of that platform, they have embedded a unique triangular stone. Now, archaeologists in India and across the world, they are very unanimous that the dating is 9000 BCE, which makes it 11,000, and that stone represents the worship of Mother Goddess. So imagine. And what they found more interesting was that in the villages surrounding that area, they found people in huts worshipping those same stones. So this continuity of mother worship, it is something that has continued in so many different forms right down till today. You know, we have Durga Puja, we have so much. And in the Indus Valley civilization that you mentioned, I'm saying this is thousands of years before Indus Valley civilization. In the Indus Valley civilization, the archaeologists found small terracotta. The small terracotta were about this size, half the size of your mobile phone. And there were so many of them that it was very clear to the archaeologists that they could not have been worshipped in temples because they were so small. So they said these were mother goddesses that were kept in individual homes and worshipped in individual homes. You know, even today at Diwali, we bring those murtis of Lakshmi Ganesh and bring them home. So that continuity of tradition has gone on. Now, in the Indus civilization, archaeologists found three shivlings in situ. In situ means they are in exact same position as they were put there thousands of years ago. So we have proof of shivling from the Indus period, and it continues. We worship shivling. They have so many great temples where Shiva is worshipped as shivling. So, you know, why is it that other civilization crumbled? But we did not give up any of our belief systems. We believed in Mother Goddess, we believed in Shiva, we believed in Ling worship. So that is because the values of this civilization had come to be believed and accepted by the commonest person in this land. So that is one explanation that I can offer for this. And you know, because you mentioned female worship, if I can just give one more example. Now this female worship, what is the evidence? I'll just make two examples.
Sure.
So female worship in Mathura, we all have heard of Mathura. So there archaeologists excavated a site which is called Kankadi Tila. And they were absolute, it's before Common Era, so it's about, you know, more than 2,000 years old. And there they found what is called Ayag Pattas. Ayag Pattas is worship stones. Again, half the size of your mobile. Now those Ayag Pattas, they have inscriptions at the bottom. They're small stones, terracotta stones or some other stone, but also again very small stones, but the inscription is there. And you know, when we talk about Mathura, we should remember that Mathura was attacked again and again and again. So what has survived is by chance. 99% of these Ayag Pattas, the donors are women. Because the name is given that I have donated this, and where is it kept? It's kept under the tree or whatever, because that's where we assume. So this, you know, we talk about, I'm not saying that our civilization did not undergo turmoil, upheaval, but the point is that the earliest evidence shows reverence for the mother, active participation of women. I mean, these Ayag Pattas, 99% of that are donated by women, and that is there in inscriptions that cannot be challenged by anyone. And the next point that I made was that the participation of every section of society. I want to give the example of Sanchi. We've all heard of Sanchi and the great stupa over there. So, I think in around early 20th century, archaeologists excavated at Sanchi. Now, in Sanchi, they found 601 inscriptions. 601 inscriptions of this site of Sanchi, which was built after Ashok. Emperor Ashok built the first stupa at Sanchi, but it was a very small structure. When people became more prosperous, they decided to expand it, and the remnants that we see at Sanchi are of that stupa which was made after Ashoka. What is the remarkable feature of these 630 inscriptions? They've all been listed in a book on Sanchi, and they have been translated into English. Now you look at those 600 inscriptions. Every inscription says who's the person who has donated to part of the construction of Sanchi. You know, some villagers have got together and donated stone for the pavement. Some have donated parts of it. And every inscription, only 3 inscriptions mention royalty. Royalty means the king is not giving donation at Sanchi, but some person who's employed with the king is donating. Rest of those 597 inscriptions have been donated. It cannot be disputed because you can go and see those inscriptions. You can see the English translation. Who are the people? One person is saying that I am a wood carver. You know, I work on wood. Another person is saying I'm a rickshaw, ekka puller. You know, and some villages are saying that we cannot contribute individually, so the whole village has contributed to making this part of the stoop. No stoop at Sanchi is the work of one person, it is the work of small ordinary people. I know Sanchi has been devastated, but if you go to Sanchi, you will see at the gate one beautiful carving. That carving has got an inscription. That inscription says that we are the ivory workers who came from Vidisha to carve this gateway, because many people were involved in the construction of, and we are donating this, you know, this pillar that we have carved, we are donating it to Sanchi. So, you know, when we talk about the longevity of this civilization, one important factor that we have to keep in mind is the active participation of all sections of society. There is no reference in these inscriptions to kings being the patrons. And I want to just conclude by giving one more example. The earliest Saraswati image that we have found comes from Mathura. Its head is not there because obviously Mathura was attacked again and again. It is badly damaged, but you know, there is an inscription at the base of that Saraswati image. And that inscription is by a metal worker, a person who works in metal. And he is saying that I am the person who has donated this Saraswati image. May Ma Saraswati bless us all. So, you know, when we have to keep in mind that the civilization survived in spite of all the upheavals because of the active veneration of this civilization, the active reverence of this civilization from all sections of society. This is something that, you know, we have not taken into consideration because the history that we have learned in schools and colleges is the history that was taught to us under colonial rule. And that colonial rule taught us that we were always divided, always fighting against each other, and an oppressive society. But the evidence does not show that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. You have very well explained us how the archaeological findings push our civilization back to worshipping female principles, and also the civilization is not just built by the kings or the conquests, but by the ordinary people. So this is something that it's astonishing to know that the history of the civilization is not just by the kings, it is by the ordinary people like us. Now I would like to request you to shed some light on archaeology on patriarchy.
Mythology.
Yes.
Actually, I've already explained, given half the answer. Uh, and there is no evidence of patriarchy in the ancient period. That's what you asked, no? Yes. There is no evidence of patriarchy because I'll again give the example of which is verifiable. And again, if you go to Mathura, Mathura we remember as the land where the first great images of Buddha were made. Because sculpture, the making of sculpture began in Mathura, and the first Buddhist, Jain, and what we call Hindu sculptures were made in Mathura. The artisans who made them were common. There was villages of artisans, and they made, murtis for Buddhists, Jains, and Hindus. Now, we all think that, the Kushan Empire were the great patrons of Buddhism. But it is surprising that in Mathura, and what I'm saying, you can verify with a visit to Mathura Museum. See, everything that I'm saying is not a piece of my imagination. I request all of you interested, please go and visit those museums. Then you can see history alive. So it is surprising that in the period of the Kushans, we think that Emperor Kanishka was a great patron of Buddhism. But the earliest and grandest murtis of the Buddha, again the inscription is there, that there is a lady. She says that I'm donating this image of Buddha on behalf of my son, my husband, my family, and my village. So I have not come across, I'm not denying the presence of males, please, but I'm saying that I have not come across any early evidence in architecture, in sculpture, which talks about a dominant patriarchy present in society. Because the earliest inscriptions and the earliest sculptures that we get, especially from Mathura, we are blessed that the inscriptions have survived, though the murti has been damaged because of iconoclastic fervor. So, many of these murtis, the nose is chopped off. But the inscription is there, and that inscription says that this lady, and then some inscriptions say that, the nuns asked us to donate. The nuns asked us to donate an image, so we are donating this image. None of the great images of the Buddha, early images of the Buddha, that can be seen in Mathura Museum or even in the National Museum, mentions a male member heading that enterprise, though the names are also included. That lady will say that I'm creating this image, sponsoring this image on behalf of my son, my husband, my village. But the promoter is always a woman. When we talk about our history, we have to be conscious that we don't adopt Western models to understand our history. There is what was the, concept of patriarchy? Right from the beginning, we find women, having such a prominent role. As I told you about these Ayagpattas, the patrons are all women. Then these early images of the Buddha are all women. So I'm saying we should allow history to speak for itself through its inscriptions, through its murtis, and not impose Western concepts. If patriarchy is there, then we should admit it, but I don't find any evidence of it.
Thank you, ma'am, for this. I would like to request you to shed some lights on the sites of Ellora and Udayagiri.
Yes.
Display astonishing
Yes.
artistic and spiritual ambition, including some of the largest representations of Shiva.
This is a very important question, but given the time, and I would like to cover more questions, so I will only discuss what is most relevant for us for understanding Indian history correctly. In all our textbooks, we are told Hindus, Buddhists, Jains were always fighting against each other. and they were hostile to each other. But if you go to these Ajanta caves, Ellora caves, we go to Udaygiri. I'll take Udaygiri first. Udaygiri is a site, there are a series of caves that were started by the Gupta king Chandragupta. Chandragupta was a follower of Vishnu. So in the in the Udaygiri caves, there is the largest Varaha image, you know, and because Chandragupta was a Vishnu follower, so that is a, you know, the Vishnu image, Varaha image is very well preserved, and people go there even today. Now next to that Varaha image, which is sponsored by the king, is the next cave is a cave that has been started by his minister. And his minister was a Shiva Bhakt. So if you go to that cave, there is an inscription. First of all, there is a statue which has been very badly damaged. That is of Chandragupta going to visit the cave of his minister, which is in honor of Shiva. And there is an inscription in that cave where the minister says, I am blessed that the emperor has come to this cave to seek the blessings of Shiva. Chandragupta did not find any contradiction because of him being a Vishnu person and the minister being a Shiv. They lived harmony. And in that same complex, there are Jain caves. So, you know, again, this is a British attempt to create divide amongst us and to say the Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains were always fighting. At Ellora, you mentioned Ellora. Ellora also, it is Buddhist caves, Jain caves, and a section of Hindu caves. They're all existing in harmony. I'll give you the example of Khajuraho, which you did not ask. Now we all know Khajuraho for the fabulous temples. So most of the temples have disappeared. They were about 85, I think only 25 remain. Now, the complex, Khajuraho complex is divided into two parts. So half the part has got temples which was sponsored by the kings. And there again, the temples are of Vishnu, Shiv, etc. And the other half of the complex are all temples built by their Jain ministers in that same Khajuraho. So, you know, it is something that really needs to be re-examined. The thing that I would like to appeal to all of you is that we have to study Indian history through Indian eyes. Don't study Indian history through imported ideas and ideologies and eyes. Only then we can see every civilization goes through pitfalls. I'm not saying that everything was always perfect, but the point is that what were the underlying features of that civilization, how it survived. These are things that we have to keep in mind, you know. And let facts speak for themselves. Don't go by what I'm saying or what anyone else is saying. Discover in this age of internet, it is so easy to check up these facts on the net. And you find out who has written what, and then you come to your own conclusions. Go to Udaygiri, see these caves, go to Khajuraho, see the Jain ministers' temples and the king's temples, all in harmony, living in that same complex.
Thank you, ma'am.
Time over?
No, we still have some time.
Okay, I thought they're telling us to go.
No. Okay, so seeing Indian history in the Indian eyes, I have a very relevant question that probably most of the audience also have. Since you have written on the Vasudeva, Krishna and Mathura and the Kashi Vishwanath, the invading and demolition of temples doesn't mean the demolition of the beliefs of people. This was something that was upheld in the judgment of Ayodhya. But we also see a lot of litigations around these two places, Kashi and Mathura, where we see the two religions coming together. I mean, the place of worship of two religions together in one single place. How, as a historian, how, as a ancient civilization scholar, do you see this, and what do you opine about it?
I'm not sure that I understood your question correctly. Are you saying, because I've written books on both, I'll be very happy to answer the question. Are you saying that in Kashi, let's deal with Kashi first, are you saying that two religions existed alongside? It's not true.
But there are two.
No, please let me clarify. It's not true at all. This is part of insidious propaganda.
No, I meant to say the religious place, the place of worship. Especially when it comes to Mathura, we also see a masjid attached
That
to.
is a separate question,
yeah.
but I'll deal with Kashi first. First of all, I want to say that we think that the history of Kashi begins in the 12th century when the invasions begin. If we want to reclaim the grandeur of our civilization, we have to reclaim Kashi from the time that the great Upanishad debates began in Kashi. So, we cannot cut off half of our history and say we will start here. Why? If we want to understand our past, Kashi was the place where the Upanishads, Tattvam Asi, that great Upanishad debate that God is within us and we are within, Atma and Brahma are one. So this is where we start the discussion on Kashi, but because time is very short, I'm just saying all discussions on Kashi should begin with Kashi as the setting of the greatest debates in India's spiritual journey. That is the Upanishad debates. And the Upanishad debates, it was the kings, one more thing, it was the kings who enunciated these debates. The kings were Kshatriyas. The Brahmins did not have this knowledge of Tattvam Asi. If you look at the Upanishads, the Brahmins asked the Kshatriya kings, please give us this knowledge. So I don't want to get into that, but to quick short. So what happens is, there is a very well documented history of Kashi from that period till the invasions begin. And what is disturbing for us is that that particular site, it was written about by the great Indian historian A.S. Altikar. You see, in 1936, that dispute had been going on. And in 1936, you will not believe it, but one gentleman by the name of Deen Muhammad, we don't know anything about him, but he filed a case against the Secretary of State in England. And he said that this entire complex is Waqf land. Now today we are fighting about Waqf again. So look at the foresight, we have much to learn. So in 1936, he files a case against the Secretary of State saying, this is Waqf land. Only one person, there's no Hindu involved, only one person against whom he files the case, and that is the Secretary of State. Look at that is foresight, I would say. The Secretary of State directs the Varanasi District Court. Of course, he rejects the claim, but the Varanasi District Court invites 35 leading residents of Kashi to come and give evidence before the court. And one of the persons who gave evidence was a very important scholar of Indian history, and he was also professor at Banaras Hindu University. His name was A.S. Altikar. So A.S. Altikar went to the court and gave his deposition, and he said, I have been visiting this place because there was no restriction ever. Hum to har roz jate the, we would go every day. So the court asked, when you went every day, what did you do there? So he said, and describe what you see there, and that shows you the Hindu resilience. He said, the Hindus start assembling at that complex at 3 o'clock in the morning. And they continue till 12 o'clock at night when the doors are closed to them. Court asked, what do they do when they go there. So he says, you know, this is the sequence in which they offer flowers or rice to the deities. This murti here, this murti here, this murti here, this. Imagine the complex had been vandalized and so many gods removed. But even then the devotees knew first this god comes, then this god comes, then this god comes, and we offer. And then they say that we throw rice at spaces which are not occupied. So court said why? So he says asking forgiveness from gods whom we may have forgotten. And I mean, it is so painful to read this. And then he says we go under people tree, and there are so many gods whom we throw rice to. Court said, where have these gods come from? He said they are migrant gods. They have come from temples which were destroyed, and we have given them shelter. So, I mean, imagine that Kashi, the story of Kashi, you don't have to be, very wise to see the history is written on the walls. When you go to Kashi, you can make out what is the history, what it was. But in spite of that, it speaks of the turbulent times that we live in, that the court did not go by this, report of A.S. Altikar and 35 leading residents of Kashi at that time, who said that people come from 3 o'clock until 12 o'clock. So the court ordered the Archaeological Survey of India to do a detailed investigation of Kashi. So the court did a detailed investigation. I don't know what they were going to investigate, but I have read that report. Every inch they have documented that this is here, this murti is here, this broken murti is there, and they've given that 4,000-page report. Now, first of all, there has been absolute silence after the report was submitted, but it is very surprising that the other party, when they were asked by reporters that how do you explain the presence of so many murtis, so they said that it was actually a workshop and murtis were being made here, so what else will you find but murtis? I mean, I don't know when we will actually recover our full past. I can only say it's a very slow, painful recovery. I don't know how long it will take, but miracles happen. When I wrote my first book on Ayodhya in 2010, I was not able to get a publisher because they said we will be dubbed communal publishers if we publish your book. And now 2024, I never thought that I will see the temple in my lifetime. I mean, and so one journalist asked me, ma'am, did you think that you will see temple in your lifetime? I said, in my lifetime, I never saw my books would be published. So forget about the temple. But if we have 2 minutes. Okay, now on Mathura. I think this Mathura story needs to be told because it's a very, very painful story. Again, the evidence is there in the Mathura Museum. You can go and check up. So the Mathura Museum has an inscription. It's a door jamb, chaukhut, which you put, on which you attach the door. So that door jamb is 8 feet long. It is broken. So we don't know how long it is because it can be, but 8 feet itself is a lot. Now that inscription, it's partly damaged, as everything in Mathura is damaged. But this person says, Vasu, my name is Vasu, and I'm erecting this. What he's erecting, again it is damaged, around a rectangle, and Toran. He mentions Toran. We know Toran means, where is he erecting this? That is very important. In honor of Vasudev, Devtaon ke Dev, that has survived. I'm making this in honor of Vasudev. So that means something he was making there for Vasudev in Mathura. Then we have so many other inscriptions which I cannot go into, but I'll just cut the long story short. And then we know that Mahmud Ghaznavi attacked Mathura and it was devastated. But how many of us know, you're saying, how did this civilization survive? Within 100 years of Mahmud Ghaznavi's attack on Mathura, we have a partial inscription which you can also see there, and it is by a person called Chhajja. We don't know anything about him, who he was, where he came from. If it was not for this inscription, we would not even know that there was such a person. And he is saying that I'm erecting this temple for Krishna. Are bhai, there was no radio, there was no mobile, there was no newspapers. How did he remember that 100 years ago, Mahmud Ghaznavi had come and destroyed this temple? And this person, how much money would he have had? Nothing. But he remembers that there was a temple of Vishnu, of Krishna, and he says, I'm re-erecting that temple. That is what is called a civilizational memory. We don't forget our past. Now, I don't have the time to get into all this. I'll just, 2 points I'll make. That, you know, at some point, Raja Patnimal of Banaras, he brought this purchased it entire Katra Keshav Dev, that is 13.37 acres. All right. In the British time, all the records are there, which I published in my book. The so-called Eidgah party went on saying, this is not Katra Keshav Dev, this is Katra Eidgah. They even changed the name. And so the court heard it again and again. The British judges were very fair. They heard every case and they dismissed every argument, and they said, you're behaving like hardened criminals. You lose a case, again you come. All right. Now, but in 1944, Raja Patnimal's heirs, they sell this, they don't sell it, they give it to Jugal Kishore Birla. They say that, you know, our ancestors wanted to build a grand temple for Krishna at this place, but we don't have the money. This is holy land, we cannot sell it. We have a small loan that we have taken of 13,000 rupees. Will you please repay that loan and take this? So they give it, they get Raja, Jugal Kishore Birla buys, takes property, this hold of this property, and he establishes a trust, Krishna Janam Sthan, whatever, foundation, to build a Krishna temple. Now, for some reason, Jugal Kishore Birla dies. He creates a trust with people like Madan Mohan Malviya, eminent people, and they are not able to build that temple for whatever reason. And this is the point that I want all of you to understand and appreciate. In 1968, this 13.37 acres, which was the land of Katra Keshav Dev, as recognized by the British. In 1968, because a government in the center was a minority government, it needed outside support of other political parties, so it gave 3 acres of this 13.3 acres to the Eidgah party, and the Eidgah that you see there is constructed after 1968. So how can you solve this? Because it's been constructed with the willing help of a so-called nationalist party. So I'm not sure what's going to happen in Mathura, because it is a legally signed agreement. That agreement is there. Whereas in Kashi, there is no agreement, and the evidence is very, conclusive. So I think that this should be the last.
Any questions from the audience side? Yeah, we have the hands raised. Can someone please pass on the mic for the audience?
Or you can come in front.
Yeah.
Okay.
First of all, my humble pranamas to Meenakshi ji for your extraordinary perseverance on the matter and your excellence in academics.
Thank you.
My question is, we had a concept of Dharma Yuddha. As I know, kings never used to destroy the properties of the people,
Yes.
and the people used to revere the kings.
Yes.
Which was this concept was not there in the invaders. Is this one of the strong reasons why our culture has retained its flavor despite so many wars and frictions?
See, what I am saying, your question is well taken, but my argument and answer is that it was not a civilization from top down. It was a civilization from bottom up in which every section participated. So it was not that Chandragupta contributed to Buddhism or only some particular kings contributed. If you look at every architectural monument of India, you will find evidence that it is the people who are contributing. You know, in Ellora, there are inscriptions, Ajanta in Junagadh, you know, all those western ghats mein jo cave temples hain. So many of the inscriptions have survived, and one person, they're all of common people, and one person says, I'm a rickshaw driver. So every day I take people to and fro from wherever they want to go, and that I contribute to the making of this cave temple. So, you know, this is not me imagining things. This is evidence that we have to allow to speak to us. We are not willing to, because we are thinking that we are wicked civilization, evil civilization, civilization based on tyranny. But let the facts speak for themselves.
Any one question would be taken because of the time constraint. Please.
Madam, you know, there is move to recover this Kashi temple as well as Mathura. The people have got to the court.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying Mathura, it's difficult because there is written documentation that 3 acres of 13.3 acres was surrendered to the Idka party. So in 1968, the question is, if the people's, now to answer about Mathura, People's Worship Act says that the status of the building in 1947 will not change. So in 1947, it was Krishna Janambhoomi. So now have you understood what I'm saying? So in 1947, it was Krishna Janambhoomi. If some political party for its vested political interests could betray the people, then again, it's for the courts to decide. But in Kashi, I'm very, very hopeful because all the evidence is there.
That's what I was asking.
You know, one more thing about Kashi, they have also found an inscription, the ASI, which says that, you know, which talks about the construction of the mosque in this particular year, and in that inscription at the bottom is the year in which it was repaired. So the evidence is, now the point is, how are we going to interpret 1991 Places of Worship Act? In 1947, even Kashi was a worshipping temple as per the evidence in the Varanasi district court. And Mathura was also. The point is that these are questions which are difficult for us to take a stand, you know.
Madam, my point is, although there is a law that is the status quo should be maintained, well, since you are a Rajya Sabha member and the BJP is in power, why can't they change the law? When constitution can be changed so many times, why they can't approve the law which was passed by the Congress government?
Long time. You have to wait for some time.
Thank you.
Will be complete.
Can we take one question? No, sorry. Okay, so last 45 minutes, we have just journeyed across millennia. We have seen that the civilization was not just built by the kings or the conquests. It was built by the ordinary people like us, nuns, carpenters, or housewives. And also we have come across to know that the Indian civilizations.
I think they're asking you to stop.
So Indian civilization sustained because of the faith at home. So every person who has kept the same sacred idol at home and worshipped, that's how we have reconnected with our civilization at homes in our daily lives. So history is not something to be,
I think this is a very polite.
yes, it is. So history is not something that has to be just studied, but to be lived every day. Thank you, Dr. Meenakshi Jain, for your...
Thank you, audience. Thank you, audience. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, audience.